Hi everybody, welcome to Simply Scuba and welcome to Top Tip Tuesday. Today I've got a bunch of tips for dealing with a free-flowing second stage. Most regulators today are what we call a downstream design, so in the unlikely event that something should go wrong, they're going to go wrong in the open position and give you more gas instead of no gas. But there are some useful things that can sort of help prevent an embarrassing situation, but let's jump straight in. The design of second stages means that the valve naturally opens if it's lowered into the water at purge button first. With the purge button facing downwards, when you lower the second stage into the water actually starts to press on the diaphragm at the bottom, and the second stage thinks that you're taking a breath, so it lets some gas out. Because there's nothing in the mouthpiece, the air is free to flow straight out through the mouthpiece, which then creates a little bit of a vacuum on the inside of the second stage that opens the valve even more. That's why it's called an exponential free flow, because it just makes itself worse. When you're getting into the water and whenever you're on and around the surface, keep all second stages mouthpiece down. That way the water pressure isn't going to be pushing on the purge button and the mouthpiece actually has something in it, the water, so it's less likely to free flow. Once the second stage is actually full of water, it should be fine to just sit and do whatever it is, unless there's like a strong current pushing onto the front of the second stage. But always try and think about the positioning of like your octo. If your mouthpiece is up, then of course it's likely to free flow. So try and make sure it's always facing downwards in the water. If your second stage does start to free flow, the first thing that you should do is just stick a couple of fingers into the mouthpiece and try and block that airway. If you block the airway enough, then the air pressure on the inside of the second stage will increase and it's just going to push the diaphragm outwards. That should close the valve. Some divers say to slap the second stage or turn it just facing down, but blocking the mouthpiece is usually the most efficient way of preventing it. If the valve has frozen open and just keeps free flowing, even if you stick your fingers in it, you can fold the hose a little bit to restrict airflow, but it's not the best for your hoses. If it's your octo and you crimp it long enough, this can actually give the valve enough time to defrost and then close without having to turn your gas off. If it's your primary, the one that you're breathing from, and you need to continue to breathe from it, you can open and close that crimped hose as you need air. If all else fails, you can close the actual cylinder valve to stop airflow completely, but remember that you will lose all other functions of your regulator, so only do it when you absolutely have to. Inside most second stages today is an adjustable vane that can redirect the airflow on the inside of the second stage body. It's often called a Venturi Switch or a pre-dive lever or something that you can use to adjust it yourself mid-dive. Free flows tend to occur when the rush of gas creates that vacuum behind it, and that in turn draws more gas, and a Venturi system is really there to interrupt that airflow so it doesn't create that vacuum. By redirecting the air on the inside so that it doesn't flow straight towards the mouthpiece, it creates a bit of turbulence on the inside of the second stage and doesn't create the same rush of air in that one direction. And by directing it back towards the front of the second stage, it actually pushes the diaphragm forwards to close that valve. So you'll get a bit of a hiss, but then it stops itself. Diving with the Venturi on might not feel that much different to it when it's off, because you can still breathe from it, but it is going to increase your work of breathing ever so slightly, which can actually have long-term effects, and you find yourself a little more fatigued at the end of the dive. So if it's in your mouth, switch the Venturi off. If it's out of your mouth, switch the Venturi on. Free flows are far more common in colder climates. When gases go from high pressure to low pressure, they get cold. Like from the relatively high pressure inside of your hose to the low pressure inside of your second stage. And the metal parts around the valves get cold the more airflow that passes through them. When you mix water, metal and cold, you get ice, which can form around the moving parts of the valve and then seize that valve open, which of course is a free flow. If you're diving in colder climates, be extra careful with your second stages and always be ready to stop them from free flowing. Set your Venturi on, and if you have a breathing adjustment on the side of your second stage, dial it all the way in. just to make it the hardest for that valve to open whenever it's out of your mouth. When you're testing your regulators before the dive, going through your pre-dive checks, and when you're on the surface, do not purge it if you don't have to. Pop it in your mouth, check that it works. You can push the button a little when it's in your mouth, but if it's ever out of your mouth, do your best not to press that purge button. It's unusual, but you can experience a free flow mid-dive, like at the deepest part of your dive. This isn't the end of the world. It takes a surprising amount of time to actually drain your tank, but in saying that, it's your primary focus to secure another reliable air source and limit your losses from that point. Whilst you're securing a new air source, you can still breathe from that free-flowing second stage. It'll get cold, especially around your teeth, but you can still breathe from it by allowing the excess gas to rush out one side of your mouth, and you actually practice that in your open water course. You can always switch to your octo, or better yet, your buddy's octo, and work quickly to limit your losses by turning off your air supply. Crimping the hose, that's the very quick way, but it's not the best for your hoses. But if you're with your buddy, then you're breathing from their octo, they're breathing from their primary, they can turn your tank valve closed, give it a few seconds for it all to defrost, and then turn it back on. If it continues to free flow, it's best just to leave it off, but remember that your inflator won't work neither because you've got no gas supply to that if you're diving on singles, so you're going to have to orally inflate your BCD to control your buoyancy. That's why twin set divers have regulators and inflators running from both cylinders. If you need to turn one off, you can still breathe and control your buoyancy from the other. The best way to avoid a free flow becoming an issue is to A, get your regulator serviced often before the dive, and B, get some redundancy in your setup. Ponies, stage cylinders and twin cylinders are all made to give you a redundant air source should something go wrong. Because it's a completely, or can be made to be a completely separate cylinder with its own valve and regulator, you can turn the faulty regulator off completely and then breathe from that completely separate tank. It's a huge investment if you're just starting out to invest in a separate cylinder or a twin set, because you're literally buying another tank, a regulator and some kind of mounting, but it can really eliminate the panic of something going wrong at the worst time. And they do take a little bit of training as well, so do some practice before you just sling an extra cylinder on you and jump in the water. But for the most part, as long as you get your regulators serviced often, use them properly, mouthpiece down in the water with the Venturi on and the breathing adjustment dialed in whenever that second stage is out of your mouth, you should be okay. If you have any other tips about free-flowing regulators, let everybody know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, everybody, and of course, safe diving.